Welcome to Pet Business Disruptors. I'm Clayton and I am here today with Al Sherrington, who is the man behind Bandaby, the hamster specific pet company which is coming through.
Yeah, homes not cages. That's the idea. The pitch in 3 words.
Yeah, no, welcome. Thanks for coming up to Peterborough. Really appreciate you coming up, spending the time to come up to us. Yeah, tell me, look, hamsters for me, I think we spoke about it before, I think is something that is highly neglected within the industry. And personally, my knowledge of hamsters really dates back to me being a 1980s pet shop kid, so hamster balls, hamster wheels. And I was saying, don't get the ones with the slats in because they can get their legs trapped in there. Get the solid ones, and all this sort of stuff, and sawdust, and the cotton wool stuff and that sort of stuff. So all stuff which I know now is pretty heinous. But yeah, no, tell me, like, how did you get into this, and why did you say hamsters needs the overhaul?
Well, look, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's heinous, but also still being sold.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it. Like, this all started. I've been working kind of big tech for the last 5 years. I was working for Uber in Latin America and was looking for something different because I wasn't my happiest there. And I came back to the UK after 2 years living in Brazil, and I hadn't seen my younger brother in like a full calendar year. And after a 35-hour journey, walked through the front door, and he asked me to go buy some fish food for his goldfish. And I kind of took a deep breath, had a shower, went to Pets at Home, walked in, and was just confronted by rows and rows of shelves of just absolutely god awful looking cages. A couple of things piqued my interest. I mean, when a multi-billion-pound company dedicates that much floor space to any category, there's normally a pretty good reason. And just the quality and the lack of design in them was what really kind of caught my interest to begin with. I don't know what it was. Like I said, I worked in taxis at that point, for all intents and purposes. I don't know what like was the bug that kind of like just made me itch. But I went home and started Googling and went down the metaphorical rabbit hole and discovered that not only are the vast majority of products you'll find sold on places like Amazon or in kind of big pet retailers ugly and of very low quality, they're also a fraction of the size they should be, the cages. And then you mentioned cotton wool, hamster balls, all these things which after 10 minutes of like searching you will learn should never ever ever be let anywhere near a hamster, and yet are still being sold, were still recommended by various kind of brands and companies around the world. And it made my stomach churn. And I've been raised as an animal lover since I was little. We've had hamsters, rabbits, guinea pigs, dogs, a three-legged dog, very nearly a micro pig. You name it. And we were always taught that animals were family. I think if there was a fire in the house and my mum had to make a choice, whether it was the dogs, us, you know, it would take her a minute. She would have to seriously think it through. And we've had dogs go to aquaphysiotherapy. We've had life-saving surgeries. They're fed organic ostrich meat most days. Like they are,
As long as it's not emu meat.
as long as it's not emu meat. We know there's a lot of love for emus in this room. And as I studied biology at university, I love animals. I grew up in Africa, surrounded by wildlife, all those sorts of things. I think you can't help not fall in love with animals in an environment like that. And I took a detour in my career, kind of working in business, but I was looking for something different, and this just felt like a mission worth fighting for. And it began this kind of 2 year journey. I mean, 6 months, I was just like a person possessed. I was just watching so many videos. I've watched assembly videos, I've read assembly manuals, I've watched cleaning videos. I spoke to every welfare person I could get my hands on, people who run rescue centers. I was in every Facebook group that you could possibly imagine associated with hamsters, just like asking people and trying to understand what the brief was. Okay, if these products aren't good, what is? That was the question I was trying to answer. Size is a big part of it. Ventilation's a big part of it. Ease of cleaning's a big part of it. And it kind of just began this kind of like journey towards creating, like I keep saying it, but everyone else is selling cages. We want to sell a home. And a home is more than just kind of a box. It's all the kind of love and attention to detail and all those kind of things that go into it. So we wanted to create something that was exceptional from a welfare point of view. There are now a few companies out there who I think deserve credit. So Bucat State, Night Angel, I think are both fantastic companies who've done a lot of good in this industry in terms of educating people and raising the bar. Um, But now they're starting to go a bit bigger. A lot of them, their earlier products were still kind of 100 by 50, i.e., the kind of bare minimum. And I think in terms of like quality and aesthetics, in terms of adoption, if you want people who are first time buyers coming into the space to adopt better products, quality and aesthetic like do matter. People understood this. Steve Jobs with Apple spent an obsessive amount of time getting the fine lines and the look and feel of the early Macs looking incredible. Elon Musk with the Tesla wanted to make it one of the fastest sports cars alive, because they knew that unless you did those things, the ordinary person who has no idea about the welfare issues in something like hamsters are going to adopt new products. You need to win their hearts and minds with the look and feel first, and then have them find out that it's a fantastic product from a point of view of welfare as kind of the secondary kind of like decision making factor. That's the reality of the world we're dealing in. So yeah, here we are 2 years later. Our site went live this week in terms of like the early pre-sales. The first products are only going to ship in December. ETA, emphasis on the E in the ETA at the moment. First time kind of manufacturing products from the get-go. But the first samples have come through. We're really, really, really excited and happy, and we think we've kind of got something really special here. And there's a lot of people who've helped us get to this point in these kind of welfare communities. Amazing people who run these rescue centers. Happy Hamsters is one who've been particularly generous with their time and let me attend their event last year up north. Yeah, there's been a huge kind of wave of support behind us, and I hope we kind of make those communities proud and kind of give the world a better option that inspires more people to adopt better practices. That's the dream.
Yeah. Like, look, and I'm gonna like show my own failings here, because like for me, I don't really understand the hamster welfare. Like I know what we were doing was wrong. But it was like when I was young, we used to have the rotor stacks. I don't know if you ever saw those.
Yeah.
So they were like these sort of like things you used to put add-ons on. There was like little spaceships and like little, and you kind of think of it now and you think like they go through these tunnels and they end up in this room that's like absolutely tiny, but it kind of looks cute for kids.
Mm.
And like, I think that isn't a nice thing is the fact we're moving away from sort of cutifying things to welfare, to be honest. It's like the hamster ball. It was kind of fun. Like like I remember my little brother had a hamster, and we had a hamster ball, and the hamster used to run around, and you'd think, oh, he's having fun, but apparently not. I mean, it's like and I think we just don't have enough information out there on what is good and like why we shouldn't be doing certain things.
Yeah, I think you need to do both, right? I mean, you need to understand what the welfare requirements of the animals are. And I think it's also important to look at products like that and ask, like, okay, the welfare issues aside, and to be clear, there are huge welfare issues with what was being sold back then. Um, but what about those products appealed in the first place was this idea of kind of world building. Like, you have
Yeah.
this whole thing, you can build the tubes and all that stuff, and like, there shouldn't be tubes, there shouldn't be wire, like there shouldn't be a lot of the components that you have in those products. Um, but actually, if you look at what there are amazing people who make these DIY enclosures, mostly because they can't access good products where they are. So they get IKEA cabinets, they hack it together to these whole things, and they create this whole amazing architected world with deep bedding. So talking about some of the minimum welfare requirements. So I keep saying size. There are differing opinions on this, but I think broadly speaking, the alignment is 100 by 50 by 50 is the minimum for any hamster breed. Any hamster breed has to be at least those sides. They need, again, varying kind of sources on this, but let's call it anywhere between kind of 8 and 10 inches worth of bedding. The more deeper, the better, I think, is one thing everyone agrees on. The more bedding you have, these are animals that would typically in the wild be digging 30 centimeters or deeper with their burrows. And if you stick a hamster in a deep bedding, like I've got a rescue sitting in my living room at the moment called Barney. Shout out to my adopted son. And he was straight under, like straight into the bedding, has dug himself an incredible labyrinth of tunnels throughout there. And then there's all sorts of things, they need lots of substrates, they need a sand bath, they need chamber hides to mimic what they would normally kind of build out in the wild. They need a big wheel. These things run like 10 kilometers a night. They're extraordinary, the amount of distance they would normally cover. And they absolutely go mad for like a properly sized wheel. The size is important because the bend, if it's too small, it's too bent and it will damage the curve of their spine. Adequate sources of water. Typically, like the way they're fed, a lot of people advocate for scatter feeding because it mimics more what they would have to do in the wild, and it's more engaging for them. And you look at all these kind of needs from a welfare point of view, and if you look at again the lessons to be learned from the old products and why they were so attractive to families and kids, and combine it with what the welfare needs are, I think there's actually a really exciting world when you see these things set up properly. They're beautiful. It looks really cool. You can make them look very naturalistic. You every few weeks you're supposed to clean out, and you have the opportunity to kind of redesign it and reassemble it. You can use lots of wood and sand and cocoa chips and different hides and all these kind of things. So I think like you can have the best of both worlds. I think you can have an amazing home from a welfare point of view and still encourage all the enjoyment of having a hamster in the family that people like resonated with so early on in those products. And I think the key is kind of marrying the two. So for example, like our grand plan is a lot bigger than just like one product. And the goals to first was to create the best home in existence from a welfare, from a design quality, as in like the strength and the structure and the ease of use, and from an aesthetics point of view. So like we would drive adoption. From those three standpoints with our first home. And then the next bit was all the accessories and the things that come around it. So if you see on our website, you'll see the little kind of like bumps on the side, and a lot of people ask, like, what are those for? And what we're doing is we're developing a set of magnetic accessories which attach like Lego to the side. So we've already got the first prototypes. We're probably going to start with platforms and sandbaths and chamber hides and all those kind of things. So you can attach things on, you can personalize it. Someone had the idea of putting a whiteboard on the outside to write kind of the name. Um, you've got the bedding, you've got all the accessories that go inside. There's all this kind of like world that you can kind of like add on to it. And the price tag of our home is probably a little bit higher than what people are used to seeing, but I think people have been overly conditioned to expect to buy a hamster like you can buy a Happy Meal. Like you walk
Yeah.
in 5 minutes later, you walk out with a you know quite frankly a shit little cage and half the things you're supposed to, and then you learn a very very hard lesson in terms of what it actually requires and what what is needed to provide these animals with a proper home. And it blows your mind, navigating that world. So even after doing almost like 2 years worth of research in this space to prepare ourselves, when I was buying everything for our first photo shoot the other day, I spent 8 hours going through Amazon products and looking and trying to understand what wood was being used. Is it non-toxic? Is that the right kind of bedding? What kind of fit? Like all these kind of questions. I'm going, God, if I've sat here as like someone who's tried really, really hard, who's very heavily incentivized to research all the space, and still it took me 8 hours. What hope does your average first-time buyer have in being able to navigate this space effectively, even with all the care guides, all those kind of things out there? Our goal is to get to a point where with one click, you can buy everything, like the whole bundle. You can personalize it if you want, but if you want to get everything, it's in one consolidated bundle with a really good kind of like pricing structure around it to make high quality products accessible for new buyers, and also more veteran kind of keepers who are looking to either upgrade or kind of add on to their hamster family at home.
Is there a big difference as well between Syrian and Russian hamsters? Because they were the two main breeds we used to sell when I was younger.
Yeah, there are quite a bit. I mean, Syrians are bigger, and it's also incredible if you see the ones that come out of the rodent mills versus the ones who are kind of like more kind of dedicated breeders out there. The size difference is radical. Like I've
Oh,
seen
really?
Syrian hamsters which are like small guinea pigs. They're enormous.
Oh,
They're
really?
a bit more demanding on space, particularly the female Syrians are notoriously like very, very picky with their homes. So 100 by 50 by 50 isn't normally recommended for them, and they'll try and like chew their way out. And then there's little things like diets, the size of the wheel they require, little things like that can be a difference, and also their personalities and their nature tend to be very different. Like you see a Russian, they're wired. It's like they've just like drunk 15 double espressos and are zipping
Yeah.
around like crazy. Whereas Syrians tend to be a little bit more kind of like
Yeah.
dopey and chilled.
Yeah, I mean Syrians are definitely like they're the sort of ones when people think of hamsters, they always think of the Syrian
Yeah,
hamster.
the teddy bear hamster, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Whereas Russians are kind of a bit more manic and like fast paced and that sort of stuff. But I
Mm.
mean, the other thing as well is I don't know how much you've looked into it. Is like diet. I mean, the hamster food diet doesn't seem to have ever moved on. I mean, it's, if I think I used to sell hamster food, but it was literally a mixed bag of grains with some monkey nuts in, and God knows what else. And I know there has been like obviously movements with things like the pelletized foods. So your sort of Burgix XL type range and Mr. Johnson's do one, etc. Like, but have you looked much into like dietary requirements of hamsters?
We have, like, in the very, very early stages, so I'm not gonna sit here and pretend to be an expert on hamster food. I know that there are a lot of products out there that there are disagreements on as to whether or not it's appropriate. Um, I'm still kinda learning the ropes in that space, and, like, with every product that we do, I said the home, like it was super, super dedicated and focused just on the home, just for hamsters. So, an example, like we don't say it's appropriate for mice or gerbils.
Yeah,
It's not because I don't think it is, because I don't know it is. Until I'm confident and I've done my research in those spaces.
yeah,
So, but like food is very much definitely like on our roadmap. It's in the pipeline.
yeah,
And you're right, like the different types, different categories, quantities, like how much variety should you just have one? Should you have a couple and like rotate between them for, not just nutritional, but also the sanity of like the animal, it's like eating nothing but like, I don't know, pick a meal like every single day for the rest of your life. Is that
yeah. 'Cause
experience?
it's funny because, like I say, like look, obviously the dog food industry has moved on massively
Yeah.
in 30 odd years, like in the time I've been around, but hamsters not so much.
Well, I think there's a fallacy, right? One of the big fallacies that I think holds in these categories is because the animal is cheap, that no one cares enough to actually spend the money or invest in the care of the animal. And I fundamentally don't believe that's true. I've got a rescue dog with 3 legs who cost me a fiver sitting in Cape Town, who has lived like a princess for the last like 13 years of her life because we absolutely adore her. I've got a younger brother who like is the stingy, buys all his clothes from TK Maxx, refuses to get anything other than a meal deal from Tesco's at lunchtime, who managed to spend £600 on a goldfish tank, like with all the accumulated bits and bobs over
Yeah,
time as he kind of upgraded it. Like people are like people with animals is a different story, and I don't think it should. Well, I don't think it does matter for many people, and I don't think it should matter on principle how much the animal costs. If you have an animal, you have a duty of care, and I think people get that, and like you fall in love with these animals. Like I said, I've got this. We had our first product, we did all the photo shoots and things, and it's just been sat in my living room. And I travel a lot, so I haven't been able to have a pet full time for a long time. But I thought I'm here, for the rest of the year. There's loads of people out there who work really hard to run all these fostering programs. I thought, why not put the prototypes to good use and house a foster hamster in it? And so we did. There was a young guy in, not too far away from me, living in London, who needed to surrender a hamster. The family was moving; they couldn't take care of it anymore. He was being kept in a tiny, tiny little cage with no bedding, no proper bedding, a very small wheel, none of the kind of like enrichment that you would see if you look at any of these kind of like home setups if you Google online. And so I just got in touch, said, it doesn't sound like you're having much luck finding a home. Do you want me to foster him and make sure he ends up in good hands? And so we've got Barney the hamster is now living at home. My partner Danny is absolutely besotted with him. She like calls herself mother of hamster. And we have spent a fortune on this thing. Like every day going, I need new sprays, that kind of thing. And even like I had a budget in mind. That budget went out the window as soon as you go like, oh well, he didn't like those treats, so we have to get him different treats now. All that kind of stuff. Like you see how people get caught up in this kind of world, and the pleasure that you get, the simple pleasure in life you get from caring for animals. You've got emus.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I don't think it matters what the animal
yeah.
is. You just fall in love with them.
Yeah, yeah. No, 100%. I adore my and like I've got like one of my chickens. Like she's like a second dog to me. I've got a chicken called Mrs. Nesbit. I've had her 8 years now, and
Yeah.
like you could literally just plonk her on the table next to you, and she'll just sit there quite happy and chirp at you. But then
Mhm.
she's also the boss of all the other chickens in the garden as well. But like it. I mean, like what's she worth? It's just not worth anything. But I've spent a fortune on her. I mean, I had a duck broke its leg, and
Mhm.
I spent like 200 quid getting a vet down to fix the duck's leg. Whereas if
Mhm.
it was just about money, I think that's the thing. When it comes to pets, you have a very different outlook on things. If you actually see the pets as non-utilitarian, if you see them as being something that is part of your family and that you actually have an emotional connection to, the money side of it is actually secondary when you're
Yeah.
doing things. Um, I, d- I found it interesting as well. You said that about like hamsters having sand baths, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that. I obviously always knew about chinchillas needing sand baths, but hamsters, like that's something I don't think people talk about particularly, right?
Yeah, well, that's what they use to clean themselves. So in the wild, they'll find sand, and that's what they use to kind of keep their fur non-greasy and clean. And actually, like there are a few little like quirks to their behavior and these kind of requirements that actually bring you the most joy. Like watching a hamster have a bath. This stuff is gold. Like you just sit there for ages watching it. It's one of the most entertaining things. Them like burrowing down and making their tunnels right in front of the glass in the enclosure, little things like that. Like that's where the magic is. Like those little things when you actually, that's kind of what I meant by the world bits. Like when you
Yeah.
include these little things in, and then you actually watch them interact and engage with it, it's extraordinary. They are extraordinary animals.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. I mean, I think about it, like I say, for me, I feel slightly embarrassed by like my lack of knowledge on hamsters. Really, to be honest, when you think about like the fact that my knowledge on hamsters literally is, is kind of prehistoric, really, in terms of
Mm.
care and that sort of stuff. Um, like, and how did you find out so much? Was it literally just by going to sort of specialist rescues, or was it just deep diving?
Yeah, I went and spoke to, like I said, anyone who would speak to me. And it was really encouraging early on. And it's one of the things that kind of like hardened my resolve quite early into the journey was the people I reached out to were incredibly receptive. These people who've been kind of running kind of rescue centers or prominent social media accounts were instantly getting back to me, like complete stranger. All I said was, "Hey, I I sense the need for a better kind of enclosure in the industry. Like, what do you think?" And immediately, "Oh my god, yes! Can we help you? If you made it, we would help you. Kind of promote it. We're desperate for more products. Pretty please." And they were all very generous with their time, very forthcoming. Um, there isn't a ton of solid guy. If you go onto certain charities and stuff like that, there is a lot of information, but a lot of the information doesn't kind of like match up across different sources. There are a lot of divided opinions if you go speak to one vet versus another vet. It's a bit like I would compare it to like nutrition as an example, where you can be a little bit overwhelmed by the number of different like
Yeah,
nuances in the advice. Um, so I don't think it's just a lack of education. I think it's also a lack of a coherent kind of point of view being brought together. I think it's more and more like coherent. Like there are like different common, as I said, the size of the home, 100 by 50 by 50 is like a very solid consensus as to that being the minimum. The minimum amount of bedding, very solid amount. Then you get into the more nuance, like how many substrates should they have? How many hides should they have? Those sort of things where there is a bit more kind of like gray area. I personally, instead of getting lost in the discussion around what minimum should be, is like I said, on principle, like we wanted our brand to be built on not just doing the bare minimum. Again, that's why like the minimum size of our home is 20% above the minimum dimensions on every. So it's the minimum's 100 by 50 by 50. We're 120 by 60 width by 70 height. I mean, ours is a sloped roof, so the slope starts at 46, but it still means that you can get way more bedding than you would do in a 50 centimeter enclosure. And there's a bunch of other things around slope roofs that we really like as well. Like the aesthetics looks beautiful. The fact that you can see in, like if you're, most of these things are not at eye level. So if you want to look in on a with an opaque roof, you have to really kind of bend down to get involved. From us, you can see it looking down in, see it standing. The fact it's sloped means that air is actually flowing through because we have ventilation on both sides. We have a lot more surface area for the ventilation. We've got 4 doors that open from different sides, all those sorts of things. Um, but yeah, we want to show people what fantastic looks like, and I think people know intuitively. If I showed you a like concrete slab with chicken wire around it, or I showed you a beautiful backyard with lots of grass and places to places to run and play, which would you say is better for a dog?
yeah,
You don't have to get lost in like the minimum size of the yard. You just go, well, that one, that's obviously better. That one,
yeah,
and that's kind of what we wanted to get more in the territory of. Instead, like just showing people side by side, and go, which one's a home, which one's a cage. I think 99 people out of 100 would look at the average cage being sold in any of these kind of big retailers and look at what we're selling, and without having any education in the space, would go that one. And
yeah,
again, that for us was the magic factor because that's what we think. There are like these amazing welfare groups who've like dedicated the majority of their lives in some cases to researching and understanding and championing better welfare for these animals. That's not the reality for the vast majority of people who are buying in this space. The average buyer is more than likely going to be a mother who's being bullied into getting a hamster by their 14-year-old, who's having to navigate this all for the first time. And that's like if we want to improve welfare standards, we have to recognize that that's the battle we're fighting. Like, how do you win over someone in that moment when they're getting into the space for the first time? And I had to conclude after like speaking to people and doing research that a big part of that is the average mother is not going to be thrilled at the idea of a hamster cage sitting in her living room that she spent a lot of money and a lot of time making look beautiful for 2 years. And if we can make something that looks beautiful in the house that you'd actually be excited to have in the home as a comparison, that is one of the like big like unlock moments that we think is going to happen to help people adopt more welfare friendly products. Or another way of putting it is like in our minds and our priorities, it was welfare first, thoughtful design, and then aesthetics. In the mind of the average consumer, that's completely inverted. They'll
yeah,
think probably aesthetics first, Is it easy to set up and easy to clean? Oh, I didn't even know there was a welfare issue. Great. Like now I feel good because I'm a great buyer as well.
Yeah.
So operating more in that kind of space.
Well, I think the thing is when people go into pet stores, they just assume what's in there is something you should get. I think that's the problem. Is that if I'm offered a hamster cage, which is a sort of classic sort of I don't know what the standard size used to be, about 50 by 20 by 20, something like that. I would have thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at that and I think, well, they're selling it, must be all right. I mean, it was a bit like round bird cages years ago. I mean, you know, sold loads of round bird cages. We didn't know any better, to be honest. But it was sort of, if
Mm.
you assume people are making it, people are using it, it must be okay. Do you know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
it's getting that information through to retailers as well is important. Is as what we should be doing because
Yeah.
um, you wouldn't see a round bird cage now in Pets at Home.
You wouldn't. And look, it's it's a controversial subject, but a lot of people are very angry with pet stores at the moment, and I think rightfully so. I mean, if you look at what is being sold today, you talked about like getting the information through to retailers. Like, cannot believe that you have executives sitting in these major, high street kind of pet stores who are unaware of the negativity of what they're putting out into the world. Like the conditions that you and I were talking about earlier on, but like the conditions animals should not be sold in pet stores. Full stop. Like,
Yeah,
an animal should not be bought like a Happy Meal from McDonald's.
yeah,
And the conditions the animals are being kept in are disgusting. It makes me really angry that so many, for so long, in so many places in the world, that like, knowingly putting out harmful products that will have a direct impact on animal health. I've seen hamsters with 3 legs who've had legs amputated from hamster balls, things that are knowing choking hazards. It's unconscionable, honestly. So I don't think it's about educating them. I think it's about taking them on. And the one of the conflicts I have as a founder in this space is people talk about retail, those kind of things. There really aren't that many retailers I'd actually be prepared to work with in the pet space on these categories from a moral basis. I'd much rather take them on and go, no, I'll just do what you do better. That's the plan here. Like, I've come from the world of big tech and all that stuff. I'm not coming in here as like the mindset of a small business founder. I'm coming in here with the mindset of like, I will completely rewrite the rule book of how this all works. Starting with one product, done unbelievably well with like the highest standards on design, but we're going after the whole lot. Like, I will not rest until these brands are completely torn apart and rebuilt from the ground up in
yeah.
the right way. So yeah, if you want to ask me like why I've dedicated 2 years of my life, 100% of my life savings into kind of making this happen, that's why.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting, man. Like, um, yeah. So you're not going to play ball with them then. You're literally going after them.
No, it would be nice to see them adopting. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm not naive enough to think here that in like 48 months' time, we're going to be sat here with Banda B being on every single high street in the UK. But maybe 10 years time, we'll see how that goes. But it would be nice in the meantime if they woke up. And I think, there are a few people. There's a guy called Alex who runs an account called Fur Baby, who gained a name for himself about being very outspoken about, the appalling cages that are being sold across pet stores. He had a petition that got about 10,000 signatures in pretty short time. And then Rishi Sunak dissolved the government and all petitions went out the window. But that shot across the bow had a lot of retailers, because I was speaking to a few of the buyers and they were there going, no, I think we've seen the writing on the wall. It was right around the time that Pets Corner started taking animals out of stores and not selling them live in stores. And they were saying, like, we're recognizing that we shouldn't be selling a lot of these products. The problem is we don't really have many alternatives. There aren't many brands actually providing the right size, the right requirements, all those
Mm.
sorts of things that we can replace it with. So we're a bit kind of stuck as to what to do in the meantime. And yeah, it's good that they're waking up to it. But I said my problem is, why is it taking so long and it's such a hard fight to get to this moment?
I think the trouble is with like big retailers is they're a big bus to turn around.
Mm,
And I think like if you think about like look in your situation, how nimble you can be as an e-commerce brand.
yeah.
It's easy for you to say, right, okay, I've developed the knowledge. I'm developing the product lines. I'm doing what's right. I think the problem is that in store, you take a company like Pets Corner, Pets at Home, and look, I'm a massive advocate. I think all stores should not be selling live animals because I don't believe it's the future. I think it's from a bygone era, and people who are still doing it are holding on to a bygone era, which isn't right. And I think that we don't need like 30 years ago, where would you have found a pet? Where would you have been able to buy a hamster from? Realistically, there was no internet. There was, adverts in the paper. Maybe. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't. It was a very hard thing to sort of pull off. This isn't the world we live in now. We live in a very connected world where people can easily get information. If you have, yeah, hamster babies to sell, and you're,
Mm,
let's say you're a breeder, it's very easy. You've got pets for homes. You've got like there's a multitude of different ways you can sort of get these things out there.
mm.
Um, but like so, I don't really see the reasoning behind carrying on selling live animals, which is why I'm a big advocate for taking them out. But if you look at the products or product ranges, the problem is that pet stores are, especially let's say your big corporates, they're a bigger bus to turn around because they kind of need something on the shelves, and they're kind of at the sort of behest of their suppliers to produce products that make sense. And don't get me wrong, they are at
Mm.
fault as well, because if they started demanding something, people would start making it. So it's not like if Pets at Home were to go to Furplast or Imac or any of these sort of like manufacturers and say, look, we don't want to sell these like tiny cages anymore. They're not right. We don't agree with it. Um, that these companies wouldn't be able to produce something else. But
But hold on, but more than that, like, they could put a shot out. Like, for me, it's taken about, being completely transparent, the thick end of $100,000, which for me is a really, really significant sum of money. It's been like the accumulation of my savings over like a very long period of working kind of jobs, and you know, many people will be putting that towards a house.
uh,
I've chosen to take on this fight instead. And, like, to me, that's a huge sum of money. To a multi-billion-pound company, who probably have a lot more experience, would have a lot more efficient ways of doing this. What was stopping them? What was stopping them? I know, like, maybe they don't
no,
want to get in the business of doing this. They wouldn't have to, like, maybe funding entrepreneurs and like putting out the brief themselves. Like, if they wanted to make the change happen, I can't believe it's because, well, no one approached us with the right product like all these years ago.
no,
That's not an excuse.
no. I
Yeah.
agree. That's why I say is that there was nothing stopping
Yeah.
them from going to their suppliers. Well, let's be honest. Look, a lot of these big retailers, they do their own products in all kinds of categories anyway. So
Yeah.
it's not like they couldn't go to manufacturers and say, look, we want a welfare friendly like hamster, and they haven't got people in their big companies that don't know anything about hamsters. So yeah, I
Mm.
totally agree. But
Yeah.
there is also, it's that corporate what's important to us, isn't it? It's sort of like, where's the money for us? Well, if you go into a pet store, most of the money's in dog, and now they're starting to look at cat more seriously because cat has become underserved. There's more humanization of cats, so now they're looking at cat more seriously. But it's kind of like the rest of it sort of gone out the window.
Yeah. I think they probably rightly recognize that if they were to do this, their sales overall would drop.
Yeah,
Like, I think the reality is that less people, if they were aware of what a hamster actually requires from a welfare point of view, would be prepared to buy. Like, people are put off by our prices. So we're £350 for hamster home. Boy, oh boy, you have no idea. Like, that is a very small fraction of the overall cost of ownership. I've managed to spend £700 just in the last month of getting set up for one like fosterer, for getting any vet bills, for getting the ongoing bedding costs, spray costs, food costs, new sand I have to get, which costs about 20 quid a bag. All this kind of stuff. It's an expensive endeavor doing these kinds of things. And, like, I think they know, if they go, well, if we price this stuff properly, we've got the right quality, our sales would half. And I go, yeah, and they probably should. And actually, I think of the current market, people probably should be more aware. Like, this is a real commitment and a real responsibility. If you look, you mentioned Pets for Homes, which, for all my knowledge and experience, have been a fantastic organization to deal with. They were how we found Barney, who's ended up at our house. Helping communities come together to rehome these animals. But look at how many animals are ending up needing rehoming in the first place, because people aren't aware of the commitment it requires. And I think two things will happen. I think there probably should be a shrinkage of the market for people, like, going, yikes. Like, if you had a dog, like, dog's not for Christmas, it's for, the next, 10 to 13 years of your life. And it's a lot to handle. So I think a lot of people will be put off. I actually think a lot of people, when they see what amazing hamster care looks like, will go, oh, actually, between a cat and a dog and a hamster, like an animal that like looks beautiful, like the enclosure looks beautiful in my living room. It suits my lifestyle. If you think about how many families today are dual income with both parents working out and about all day, there aren't many like animals where they sleep all day and they wake up at night when you come back, and they kind of fit more around like the modern lifestyle. A lot of people live in apartments where like having a dog or a cat isn't as appropriate or as accessible. So I actually think like yes, there'll be an initial contraction, but I like saying like if you show people what's possible, like how many other people who do have like the intent and the love and the care and like the means to provide like wonderful homes for hamsters will consider them as an alternative pet. Given like I said, increasing dual income families, increasingly people living in apartments for longer and longer. Just natural kind of like pressures towards like alternative pets. Um, and I like to believe that both things can be true. And the other thing with a lot of the pet retail models as well is they're operating on this thing of like it's instantaneous gratification. I go in and in the same afternoon I walk out with a live animal and theoretically everything I need in inverted commas um, to care for that animal and provide it with a loving home. Um, that shouldn't be the case. And if you look at the downstream consequence of that and you go, okay, well, if you start moving to a world in which it's not an instant purchase, it is something that requires a bit more consideration. Like, there aren't many places that will just like let you walk out with a puppy like these days for good reasons. And you go, well, if that's the case, and you don't need to have everything delivered all in one go in a 5 minute like spending spree, how does that affect other elements of the business model? Like, why do I have to have so much stock in store? Tesla, for example, when they were doing their showrooms, went, why would I rent out some gigantic space and actually have all the stock sitting in prime real estate in all these major cities? Why not go to a shopping mall, have one car sitting there, and go, like, if you order a car, it'll look exactly like this one, maybe a different color, and we'll deliver it to your house. Completely changed the retail kind of like infrastructure around the act of buying a car. I'm asking myself a lot of the same questions, like why do I need shelves and shelves of stock? Why do I need massive spaces like Pets at Home or these other companies have? Why wouldn't I just have a couple of show products and say, buy now, click here, we'll have it delivered to you in one to 2 days. And if you need it sooner than 1 to 2 days, I'm going to ask you the question, why are you in such a rush? And maybe you should slow down and reconsider. I actually don't want to ever have a situation where someone could click and buy and have it delivered that afternoon, because it sends all the wrong signals from a welfare point of view as to like where that person is in their journey and their education of what the animals need.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's do you know what? It's that thing where it's sort of like I sort of think back, obviously, to my life in the pet shop as a kid, and it was always like hamsters were kind of almost like a starter pet for people. And do you know what I mean? It was like, oh well, it's cheap, and that can be their first pet. But actually, do you know, like what's this? The welfare considerations shouldn't be any different, regardless of the animal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I think like I know most of Europe's banned goldfish bowls, for example,
Mm,
and like because that was always like the cheap way. It's like, oh, you just get a bowl. Bowl's like a fiver. Goldfish are a quid.
mm,
Get a little tub of food, bit of gravel in the bowl. But it's like it's such an unnatural environment for that creature that it's functionally cruel. And like
mm,
we shouldn't, like the idea that you get a starter pet and it's cheap and it's you give them an environment that's cruel. Like that's not right, to be honest. And like no, I'm totally with you. And I do think that that should be beaten out of the industry. There should, and if that causes a contraction, I do agree that is for the right reasons, and that like then people can actually see hamsters for the animals they are, rather than being sort of like a cheap, almost throwaway pet, which people start with.
Yeah, you're completely right, and like I do think the writing's on the wall. And there are some really kind of progressive movements out there. So in Switzerland, not hamsters but guinea pigs, I think they've legislated now that you have to buy them in pairs. Germany, I think, is probably one of the more advanced markets in legislating a lot of this stuff. I'm not going to sit here with hold my breath that like the government is going to find it on their kind of like priority list anytime soon to make changes in this space. I'm a big believer in like the power of private individuals and private companies to kind of really set the bar here. But a lot of people have described our products as aspirational. I prefer to call it inspirational. Like, yeah, it's more expensive and it's high end, but like this is what it could look like and what it should look like, and moving more into those kinds of spaces. And I think a lot of people, so I'm hoping not putting too many people off at the moment, but like buy them for kids and go. Do you realize that a lot of the evenings they won't come out until about 11 p.m.
Mm,
Like the hamster is nocturnal. they
Yeah.
will burrow and they will sleep and then they will come out to forage. And they may, like, you get hamsters nicknamed ghost hamsters, which you just won't see for months.
Yeah.
They're happy, they're doing their thing, they're foraging about, but they're like a little bit more skittish. They take a little bit more time to warm up to you. They're not designed to sit there cowering in a corner until you that come to like pick them up and play with them outside.
Mm.
Um, all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's a lot that I think needs to be overhauled in the space, like end to end. I don't think it ends with hamsters as well. Hamsters is our first, you know, our first mission because we think, like I said, so it is a hamster you associate with so many families. I don't know many families who haven't at some point in their history had at least one or two hamsters among, in the home. And we saw a particularly horrendous, set of products out there that we thought needed to be addressed. But I don't see dissimilar trends in kind of rabbits, guinea pigs, other kind of like smaller categories. And one of the questions we ask ourselves, if you look at dogs, and you kept saying dogs, and I think it's a great kind of yardstick for us to use. Dogs products today versus where they were 25, 30 years ago, whether it's food, and you've got amazing companies like Lily's Kitchen. You guys had By Teddy on the other day, who are kind of going into more kind of accessories and the lifestyle kind of elements of it. And when we're now in the stage of dogs where it's moving beyond just the functional improvements, but now like, oh, just aesthetics, and like, we're into kind of more of like a luxury kind of space there. And I think that so many of these other categories will catch up. You mentioned cats. Cats is another one where we're seeing like a huge amount of innovation. Omelette is doing really exciting things with chickens. There are amazing companies doing stuff with horses. Like, there's all this kind of innovation. We kind of think it's inevitable. Like, it's an inevitable force that's coming for all these categories that's going to level up. It will have different implications. And like we said, we want to be on the front lines doing this for small pets.
No, definitely. No, it's definitely like thought provoking anyway, from my perspective, because um, like I say, I almost feel embarrassed by how little I thought about it in some ways, because you just kind of like I say, as much as I try and be part of the modern pet industry, and I try and be on the cutting edge, I do like have areas where I'm like 1980s sort of pet shop head on me, to be honest, where I think about hamsters as almost, like I say, the rotor stack cages and the wire cages, and then you're saying people, like I say, like the wheels. Our main concern with wheels is don't give them the one which is slack. Give them a solid one, because it catch their legs in there. You don't even think about the spinal thing, to be honest. So like I say, but this is something we need to talk about. It's something that needs to be out there. And like I say, look, hamsters are great animals, but they are nocturnal. And you know what? If you go in their crate at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to get the hump with you. Do you know what I mean? I've been bitten more than once by hamsters, like growing up in the shop. So um, yeah. So like in your own trajectory, obviously you've started with houses. So are you looking then to do the range of like sands, substrates, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, the sequence in which those things happen is still to be decided. The bedding is a big one because it's a huge part of the purchase. The overall kind of value of owning a hamster. Like, a lot of it goes into the bedding because it's expensive. You need a lot of it. I mean, it was almost comical when we filled it up. My business partners, Mark and Harry at Beta Design Office, were very kind because I was traveling abroad and we had the first prototype and they wanted to do some testing with how much bedding we required. And I went on Amazon. I was like, right, okay, how much bedding do you need to fill this up? And I found the biggest bag I could find. I thought, this is probably overkill. It was about 35 quid, but I'll send it over. And they sent me a picture back and we'd filled up about that much of it. And they went, we think we need about 9 more of these. And I went, that is ludicrous. Like, how much it costs to fill up just the minimum, like 30 centimeter mark on our home. And you go, that there needs to be, like, in when it came to the home, like, we thought we had to price higher in order to get something that didn't compromise on welfare and didn't design quality. With other products, we think it's actually more of an opposite, where it's more of a supply chain logistics optimization kind of exercise.
Yeah.
We are sourcing really great product, you're bundling it together, you're pricing appropriately, like how you deliver and ship it, so we can actually bring those elements of ownership down in terms of cost, and eventually like bundle these things all together. Um, and yeah, so like bedding, the magnetic accessories we really, really want to design. Like, one, because I think it would be a really exciting kind of add-on for our own homes, but also because, like, having kind of had the hamster in the house for a while, like, platforms, those kind of things are really awkward. It's a fixed height. They look a bit naff, if you ask me. It's like very like arts and craftsy kind of wooden platforms and stilts and glue and all those sort of things. And I think we can create something that is one, like, aesthetically a lot nicer to look at, and two, importantly, like much better functionally from the ease of use within the home. So those will probably be the two things we focus on. And then food and nutrition, like I said, I think not just from a product development point of view, but from a research point of view, I think we have a lot of work as a team to do before we'll feel confident really kind of operating properly in that space.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I know obviously you talk about the product being expensive, but I think it's only expensive in terms of like the frame of reference people currently have. I
Yeah.
think if we look at like, and I say this to people a lot, is that if people are actually truly motivated about getting a hamster for the right reasons, it's actually not crazy money. Like, I mean, like people have no problem spending £1,000 on an iPhone, or do you know what I mean? There's or like going out for dinner, which costs them like 100 quid for a family of four, or like 150 quid for a family of four. So the concept of like going, well, okay, we're going to save up, we're going to get a hamster, and we're going to buy something that is actually appropriate and like because once you've bought it, you bought it. Now, obviously, the internal costs, like the substrate costs, that sort of stuff, that is different because then that becomes a monthly expense, and
Yeah.
that's where people are slightly more concerned. So, um, but again, yeah, if your plan is to sort of fight against retailers, like there's subscription models you can do, and be that
Exactly. And like, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on, but like just on that last bit, it's the subscription model. If you look at companies like Nespresso or printing companies, where they focus on is selling you the ink,
yeah,
or the Nespresso pods, and like eventually, there are other ways you can make our products more accessible rather than just trying to reduce the upfront price.
yeah,
Because I said, if you do that, what we'll be forced to do, like, I'm not making, for anyone watching out there, like, I'm not making a for. If anyone's under the illusion that I'm making like millions of pounds off of selling these hamster homes, you are sorely mistaken. Like, I'm gonna probably just about break even on the first runs, especially when we're in limited batch sizes and all those kind of things. Like, the reason the price tag's high is because the quality's high.
yeah,
We've been like very, very unrelenting and uncompromising from our own belief point of view as to like what the quality standard should be. That will improve over time as we get scale and we improve our tooling and all those kind of things. Like, there's pathway to getting more profitability out of it. Um, but where we want to get to is places like, we've already done things like paying off installments. So with Klarna, you can pay off in 3 goes if you don't want to pay it all at once. But getting to bundling pricing where you go, look, we'll basically give you 50% off the home if you kind of come in, and we'll supply you with everything else you need.
mm,
And then we can get the efficiencies and the user experience there. Because, my goal wasn't to make something that was so expensive that the majority of the population in the world just couldn't afford to do it. My goal was to make incredible products and then find ways to make them accessible. And we're
yeah,
going to be like innovating a lot in these. I talked about the retail experience, ways we can strip costs out of there. There are other ways that we think we can get creative in that space. And that's one of them. And, like you said, I don't think it's a crazy amount of money, like £100 more than the other competitors in the space. Yeah, it's about 2 pints in
yeah.
London these days. So yeah, it's not
Yeah,
it's not crazy about.
two pints of the sandwich in a bar, yeah, that's for sure. I mean,
Half a sandwich maybe. But yeah, it's not. I don't think it's a crazy amount. And actually, like, one of the things we wanted to do was, aesthetically, from a design point of view, is we also wanted to speak more in the language of interior design and look at like furniture and all those kind of things. Because I think a lot of the like brand story and the selling story to people is going, well, look, I said, I've got a sister who's just like redone a house and like spent a fortune on like very carefully curating her beautiful living room and all those kind of things. And she was one who said to me, "Is like, how, like, this thing's gonna be sat in my living room for 2 years. How much do you think I'd be prepared to spend to not have my living room ruined for 2 years?"
yeah,
And I said, that is a very, very different story. Someone spends like 3 grand on a couch. The idea of spending an extra £100 to have something that actually looks the part. And the brief to my partners, Mark and Harry, um, who are very, very talented industrial designers who've been operating in furniture and pets for, combined 30 odd years between them. They used to work for the Sebastian Conran group. And, the brief to them was like, imagine if Smeg or Brabantia made a hamster home. These companies who took, can you imagine how crazy you would have sounded, 80 years ago to say, hey, a bin?
yeah,
Imagine if I made it red and made it out of aluminium and charged people like 150 quid for it.
yeah,
Like, you would have sounded like a lunatic. But people go, but no, it's big. It sits in your kitchen. You want it to look nice. People, the aesthetics do matter. I do think that, like, that's something that with a lot of these like advocates and welfare, like understanding what will motivate people to buy proper products is important. It's a huge part of like making change. And like I said, we recognize that we have a lot of people out there who are house proud, who do care what sits in their home, who will be motivated to buy better welfare products because it looks nicer.
Mm.
And that's not to be something that's overlooked, I think, in the design of anything that we put out there.
But I think that's part of the reason why the rotor stack stuff used to work years ago, is because it had like a slightly cool look to it, and
Mm.
like the fact that like welfare wise it was horrendous. Like
Yeah.
it, conceptually what you're saying is not too dissimilar, because what you're doing is creating the world, and like you want it to look good, you want it to, like represent like a high level of quality.
Mm.
But the difference is where you're just focusing on the welfare. But by focusing on the welfare, then you've got like a hamster which is much more natural in its own habitat and happier within that. And like, look, people, if you go to a London person who's living in a £500,000 flat in London somewhere, do they really want a sort of a wire cage sitting somewhere, and they're flicking out like sawdust all over the floor and that sort of stuff, and it looks a real mess, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean those road sack ones, they use the design language of toys. They
Yeah,
were looking at like plastic toys and all those kind of things,
yeah,
like and something that belonged more in a kid's room. I said, I think the one thing they obviously understood was how to kind of get that kind of appeal, and I said that whole like world building piece. But again, they missed two things. They missed the welfare side, unquestionably, and also like but they got relegated to the kid's bedroom.
yeah,
They weren't something that would have been permitted in most households to live anywhere in like a communal space where you'd have guests and all those sorts of things coming in. One of the other problems you have with hamster homes, a lot of cages, is odor. Because if you have a tiny cage with nowhere for hamsters, are a bit like cats. Like they pick
uh,
one area of the cage. They're very hygienic. They don't like spreading it around. And if they have a lot of space and there's a lot of like ventilation coming in, we've had our hamster sitting in my living room for ages. You notice the smell of the sprays, which is like a vaguely plant-like aroma. But little Barney is he's a treat. No smell at all. Like we're cleaning him kind of every week. You're supposed to do kind of spot cleaning and things like that, just to like a little bit of maintenance. Nothing too serious. Um, but yeah, like I think I said, there are lessons to be learned and kind of built on there to kind of get into the right mindset with these people and kind of make something that people will really, really enjoy, that looks the part in a home, that really engages people. And it's been a long way together. I think we're kind of straddling two worlds, because we're working with these amazing people in the welfare community, and we're also trying to kind of break into mainstream. And so we're looking at feedback, and we've been a little bit daring, I think maybe is the right word, in terms of like where we've listened to the feedback from the welfare community, like unquestioningly, things like size and ventilation, and where we've taken a different stance for two reasons. Like, if you look at most of the new products in the space, they're kind of like square looking tanks.
yeah,
Um, and a lot of the feedback we got was like, have a flat roof, just like have a flat roof, make it square, all those sorts of things. We went, well, two reasons. One, if you want to innovate in the space and get more people to adopt better products, and doing exactly the same thing as everyone else probably isn't going to do very much. Like, we've seen what happens when you build those products and still people are buying cages and all that stuff. So like, I don't think doing the same thing and expecting different results is a good way of going about it. And two, with our kind of like sloped roof, there are a couple things. Like, one, aesthetically, like the symbolism of it looking like a home for us was really important. Secondly, like there are functional benefits. Like, if you have a 70 centimeter like sloped roof, for example, you can add a lot more depth without adding a crazy amount of weight, because we're losing the corners. So we've pushed the boundary right up to like the nearest gram on like what we can get away with without qualifying for like, and for anyone who's like thinking of operating the space, like find out what the minimum shipping weights are for like anyone you're planning to deal with. Because
yeah,
if you fall the wrong side
yeah,
of that little threshold, the shipping costs become insane. Like, you basically need two people to carry it out of the van, which means like the human cost of
yeah,
delivery is crazy high. So we've really, really, really pushed the envelope as far as we can on size and on weight, while kind of increasing the depth. And like I said, things like, if you've got a flat roof and you're looking down at it, like you can't see what's going on. We've got the ventilation, like, so there's little things like that where we've kind of like challenged the kind of status quo. And we also didn't want to compete with other brands out there who we thought were serving use cases really well. So we don't want to like fight with Night Angel and Bouquet State, which again I think are great companies who've done a lot of good for the industry. They do stackable cages, and I think they do like a really good job of it. We wanted to do something different to help kind of expand the reach of proper care to like a different audience, a broader audience, and kind of work, work to expand the pie together in terms of like fighting over like the same slice
Yeah.
as a group.
And what substrate should you be using? Because that was always a question which I didn't never really knew the answer to. Because like years ago, we used to just use wood chips, and then we used to have that neat nest stuff, like Nest X and Neat Nest, which was like a cotton wool or like a
Mm.
sort of a shredded paper bedding.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, there are a few different options. So instead of me diving straight into like what the best in verticals, there are again like different opinions as to what
Yeah,
people use, and also it's what's available where you live,
yeah,
given that like supply chains don't extend to the full four corners of the world. So people tend to think across like a few different spectrums. They think about the dust is super important because like if you have a really dusty product, you worry about the respiration effects
yeah,
it'll have on the animal. Then you have the hygienic impact, like how absorptive
yeah.
it is, and how well it's going to prevent kind of odor buildup over time. Thirdly, you have burrowing strength. So like you need something that when it's compressed, so you put it in, you kind of push down and pat it down before you start adding things like the platforms and the wheel and all that kind of stuff to make it easy for the animal to burrow. And it's really sweet when you see them because they'll dig like really proper tunnels right in front of the glass and the
So
top
you
of it.
want to compact it slightly, do you?
You want to compact it to make it easy. Some people mix in different, so like paper and a little bit of aspen shavings and things to kind of create a mix that's easy to burrow through.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, you compact it down. They build these incredible networks of tunnels very very quickly. Like if they're not all animals burrow straight away, but like a lot of them do, and it's incredible. Like that it's like watching a very very cute version of an ant farm. Like the way they dig in. And lastly, and I think like probably the bottom of the list at the moment, but something that I think is a gap in the market from a consideration point of view is aesthetics. Like there are companies out there doing more like bubble gum, kind of like blue and white and pink and green and stuff, which I think like has its place. Whereas I think, at least from my own personal taste, I like the more kind of like naturalistic. Like I said, I'm thinking of this like living in a living room where, we're seeing a beautiful room today with like green painted walls and like the sofas and things like that. And you're going in a nice, like modernly decorated room. You want that kind of like beautiful, naturalistic, kind of like wood kind of like aesthetic. So I personally do a bit of a mix of kind of aspen shavings, which are really lovely to like the touch and very kind of soft, and also really high grade kind of paper bedding as well. And then other substrates which you put in trays that you can kind of like dot around the home. So we mentioned sand, having a sand bath so they can clean themselves. But things like cocoa noir, moss, they absolutely love moss. Or at least Barney like went mad for it. You've got cocoa chips, I think I mentioned, cork granules, there's a few different ones, and you're supposed to have kind of a mix between them. I put like big cork log in there as well that he likes to kind of burrow under. You can have different types of wood, creating like clutter is a big theme because these are prey animals.
yeah, yeah,
So the fact that they're normally in an environment where they're being hunted constantly, it means they like cover. They don't like feeling super exposed. It's one of the reasons when if you see them in a cage without cover, they're so stressed
yeah,
because they're constantly feeling like terrified the predator's going to come and get them.
yeah,
It's also one of the reasons, like, again, the slope roof, the advantage is like if you have a vertical roof that opens up at the top, you're constantly coming at them from the top. Like a big, can you imagine being a tiny little hamster and seeing, my hand descending upon them?
yeah,
Flashbacks to the wild. So, having a home that you can interact more at their level, if not like coming directly at their level, at least coming from like a gentler angle, means that you're a lot less threatening when you're kind of interacting with them in the early days. Um, little things like that. But yeah, like the substrates, there's a mix. I think one of the things that we'll do as we're kind of building out that kind of like arm of the business and expanding the range there is do two things. Is like one, give people options because I accept there are different tastes and different
yeah,
preferences, but also tell people how much and like what the recommendations are. Like, hey, by the way, you need about 5 bags, and ideally it'd be a mix of one or two of them. And here's roughly like what the ratio we would use is, but feel free to do what you like. Um, and everything you see here is completely welfare approved of the highest like standard and will be delivered in one bundle simply to your door. That's the dream.
yeah. No, it's wild.
It
No,
is. It is. But like I think a lot of people will probably empathize with your position because you're obviously an animal lover and
yeah,
like you've been in this in in the pet industry for decades now. And I think a lot of people have all the right intention and all the right sentiment towards this in terms of like wanting to do right. but not really knowing where to start, or like even if you do know and you do go on the research, it's quite an overwhelming. Like, you download hamster care guides and things, and there are some amazing ones. If you go to the hamsterwelfare.com, Blue Cross, Happy Hamsters have their own as well. Like, there's a bunch of people out there who spend a lot of time trying to create materials. It's a lot. It's like, studying for an exam. Like, it's pages and pages and pages of information. Where they try and recommend brands, not all those brands have a global presence. So you're sat there going, okay, well, those are great, but what about the 3 I can access in my pet shop? Are they fine? And trying to like understand the fun. You're asking about like what about pet food? And they're going, like, Clayton, I don't know. Like, I'm sitting
Yeah.
here, like, I've got recommended brands I'm using. Why is that brand better than that brand? What's the ideal mix? If we were going to make one, what would the ratio be? Those are questions I'm going to have to spend easily a year trying to understanding, like, solely.
I think when it's like when you said how much bigger Syrian hamsters can get when they're brought up in the right environment, that kind of like shocked me out a little bit, to be honest. And that's
Mm.
what I was thinking. That's why I sort of started thinking about nutrition, because like obviously it's like, look, if you don't feed something properly, it's not going to grow to its full potential. It's not going to be particularly healthy. And then if you do have something which is come from a healthy line, is fed on the right food, it will naturally be healthier and also will live longer. And like that's the thing. I think we sort of are used to the idea of hamsters living 18 months, 2 years. But like, what is the potential lifespan of them? I don't know because
It goes up to, I mean, you do see some who kind of get pushing towards 3, but they don't look happy by the time they get to like 3 years old.
yeah,
I mean, 2.5, I think is a really good innings.
yeah,
And the answer is it depends. I mean, like I said, I would really encourage a lot of people for the reasons you mentioned earlier. Yeah, there are a lot of hamsters that need homes. Many of whom, Barney was 1 year old. I mean, he was previously called Slim Shady, but I couldn't bring myself to
yeah.
continue
I,
that.
I wouldn't be having that
No,
either, to
no,
be
he was
honest.
immediately renamed the second I was around the corner from the house. He became Barney. But Barney was 1 year old. There are a huge range of kind of ages you can get, but it depends in the circumstances of the hamster before you got them. So like whether they were kept in like a pet store for ages. I mean, coming to pets at home, I did ask the question to someone who works on shop, because I was willing to accept and like, be skeptical of the information you hear online. There is misinformation out there, like floating around about all sorts of issues. So I wanted to kind of like do a bit of, like direct homework myself. And I went in and asked someone who worked at the store, I said, how long do hamsters actually typically spend in these conditions? Is it a day, a week? So look, a lot of them, especially the little cute ones, like they're in and out in 5 days. They do not spend that much time in these enclosures. She went, that one's been here 3 months
Well,
and we're not sure. And the ones with red eyes have got no hope. And we try and make a good life for them, but we're not going to show. And well, if you have animals who've spent months on end in those sorts of conditions, or there are all these like, I really applaud the guys who do work in these spaces who spend a lot of money and a lot of time going to extraordinary lengths to pick up and rescue and rehome these animals, but they come from all sorts of backgrounds. So like obviously that will impact the lifespan. And
yeah, and like obviously them growing to their full potential and that sort of stuff. And like I say, look, that sort of rodent mills, as you call them, they are a part of the industry, and like it's because the thing is that I think it's I think consumers understand that they should be buying dogs and cats not from pet stores anymore.
yeah.
But I think like there still is like work to do in terms of like making sure that people buy from reputable breeders when it comes to hamsters
Yeah.
and other small animals, because it like I say, I think it's just cultural. And again, I talk about cultural shift a lot, and I know we're talking about like dogs and like the cultural shift from dogs being,
Mhm.
when I like living in Ireland when I was young, like dogs were just let out and they used to go from farm to farm, and like you'd see them like a week later, and now there are babies. Do you know what I mean? They sleep in people's bedrooms, and the cats are moving in that direction. But again, it's only right that everything should sort of move in that direction. If something is seen as a pet, that it becomes a part of a family unit and has the right level of care. It's just getting there, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, there's a lot to be optimistic. Like, I when we talked about like the genesis of all this, me going to pets at home and then coming back and seeing my laptop and going down this kind of, a lot of what I saw like horrified me. I
Mm,
saw really disturbing images, animals that had, completely maimed themselves and like had cages smeared with blood because they were trying to chew their way out. Like, animals had lost limbs, and and there's a kind of like really awful meme around hamsters about like the mysterious ways and terrible ways in which they die,
yeah.
which I think speaks volumes as to like the work that needs to be done in this space. Um, but the counter to that was this amazing community who do go to extraordinary lengths, and they gave me. I watched. There's one girl. I can't remember which account it was, but I watched in that first week when I was like the idea for Vanderby was born. I watched her spend 27 hours. She slept on the floor of her bedroom because like the old hamster home was on the bed, and she was like building this massive IKEA cabinet together out of it and spending, hundreds of pounds of her pocket money and like, really kitting out and spending hours and hours and hours, filling it and making it look beautiful, and then kind of putting in like the pride and the love that kind of poured into those kind of experiences. And that I didn't just see one cat, I saw dozens and dozens and hundreds of these like, people out there who are doing amazing things for their animals. Which gave me hope, and again, I think challenged the mindset of like, no, I don't need to believe it. I've seen it. I've seen people who will go to extraordinary lengths for an animal like a hamster, or like say we talk about emus and ducks and all these kind of things. Like
Yeah.
I don't think that that matters. The challenge was getting from that moment to where we're sitting now. And like for anyone who's interested, like I'm not a designer. I work in products, but I work in digital products. So I've never run a physical like logistics supply chain. I've never designed. I've worked with like you know Figma and all these kind of like tools to design screens. It's a very different ball game creating something, and not something that just looks nice, but something that's actually manufacturable. I was actually considered myself lucky that I got laughed out of a few manufacturing conversations very early on, because I think I would end up on a very dangerous path. It was actually a mentor of mine who has developed a very successful brand called Field Bar, who's like amazing kind of cool boxes. And he said to me like, your worst case scenario is you find a designer who makes something that looks pretty, which someone will manufacture, and then you discover you have like 10,000 units in a warehouse that you just can't sell, and that is a very expensive like problem to have. So the one of the hardest parts, I think, for any founder like operating in a space of physical products, and I'm sure there are lots who've been on your show who are probably listening to the show right now, is how do I get from that like I have this amazing idea and there's this huge issue I want to solve and all those kind of things, to actually a physical product arriving from like factories ready to sell at a very high quality assured standard. um and the best advice I was given by far, and I'm so grateful that someone taught me this lesson early on, was if you think you're being clever by like saving money on a designer, like don't. Like that is the wrong thing to say, because you're going to end up with stock that you can't move, or has some horrible defect and ends up with real animals getting hurt. um, so yeah, I mean, I started reaching out, and the whole point was a disruptive level of quality and welfare and aesthetic and all those kind of things. So I needed to get a really talented set of designers. Do you want to guess how much the first quote was that I got back?
Go on. I, well, from a designer,
Yeah,
I don't know. That's like it can be anything, can't it? 50 grand.
£250,000. Yeah, and I mean, it's an amazing. I was very ambitious. I went to a group called Leia, and Ben, who's the founder, was like very generous with his time, like gave me the time of day and had a conversation. But these are the guys who do like Bang& Olufsen and like those sorts of things. And I wasn't asking for him personally. I was like, can I give you a bit of equity? Would you like, can we come to an arrangement? He's like, mate, no, we're really, really good at what we do. Like we're the make or break factor as to whether or not these products sell for millions, or like, barely go off the ground. Like we charge what we charge for good reason.
yeah,
And I found that was pretty much the case with, he said, an average freelancer is going to charge you easily like 80 grand a year to do this properly.
yeah,
And it will take a year, easily a year from
yeah,
start to finish. However, like clever you think you are, and however like progressive. And like I said, I come from the world like move fast and kind of like build
yeah.
things really quickly. You can't cut corners on this kind of stuff. So yeah, I was very lucky that I found Mark and Harry, who are both like very talented designers. They came from like a very high pedigree. Like I said, working for the Conran Group. It's a big like furniture dynasty in London. The family run the Kensington like Design Museum, those sorts of things. And Mark and Harry were, you know, desperate to kind of go off on their own. They did during COVID, and they went off and they've built this amazing kind of business for themselves. And they shared my love for animals. Like it was a very easy sell. Like we met up, had pasta in Clapham, and I said, you've seen what's happened in dogs. Like it will happen to other categories, and we could be at the forefront of kind of making that happen for a category that really desperately, from a business point of view, like there's no brand like that. I mentioned Bouquet Stace and Night Angel, but if you ask the average family in London who haven't done their homework, so name a brand in hamsters, no one's ever been able to give me an answer to that question.
Yeah.
No, there is no real like branding kind of moat or power yet, as much good as those kind of companies have done. And I also think, like, from a quality point of view, like, yeah, they've functionally got the size, but those things bow under the weight of bedding. Like, if you watch the videos, like, they literally bend
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
you fill it up. So I don't think the quality's there. I don't think aesthetically they've done the job to, like, pass the living room test.
Yeah.
Um, so they've come on board. They're equity partners. They have 15% of the business, which I consider the best bargain of any deal I've ever done in my history. Like, they've been unbelievably valuable to the team. Like, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
Yeah.
So they're not here with me on the sofa, but they deserve 98% of the credit, I think, in terms of making the product look as fantastic as it does today, as functionally, like, sound as it does today. The fact our first prototype was, like, almost completely perfect coming out the
Yeah.
gate. And they come with a ton of manufacturing experience. They've taken products to markets. They've done all this kind of stuff before. And it's the best advice I would give any founder in, like, a space like this. If you're doing physical products and you've never done it before, is you need to find a team or designers or a co-founder or someone who knows these, like, very, very difficult lessons and can give you the advice in real time.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't know if you've heard similar things from other founders, in the past, but that to me has been, like, the difference maker
Yeah.
in terms of getting
No,
getting
look,
here.
having your right team is everything, to be
Yeah.
honest. And look, if and also pitching at the right level as well. Like I say, it's going to the guy who designs Bang& Olufsen to design a hamster cage probably isn't the right move. It's not going to be an economically successful move. Let's put it that way.
I mean, he gave me a quote. In my
Yeah, yeah,
defense, like, I did get the quote, but it was not a quote I was able to afford.
yeah,
I think the other thing, and it's a really interesting debate that I think ebbs and flows over time in terms of, like, where people lean to on this is, like, should you go out and raise a load of money and try and do this, or should you kind of, like, work and do it part time?
yeah,
I personally am a huge advocate of the latter,
yeah,
especially, like, in this space where we're inventing a lot of stuff from scratch.
yeah,
If you're doing a beauty product, or whatever, it's a formula exercise, and then you stick in a bottle and you put a label on it. Like,
yeah,
there isn't as much manufacturing ingenuity that has to happen. When you create something like ours, you're inventing tooling. I can't just go to someone like, hey, make me that but in green and let me put my branding on it. That doesn't work. We're trying to build something better than currently exists in the category. So it's a lot more challenging. And again, where animal welfare is involved, what I did not want to find myself in the position of was having to sit there with, like, a ticking clock with a finite amount of money, which was going to run out pretty quickly, and being forced into making design decisions or timing decisions that would compromise welfare. My worst nightmare is my products going out and an animal being hurt as a result.
yeah,
So the fact that I've been working full time, and I'm very lucky, I have an amazing job that I'm really grateful for, and I work full time. The other thing is, like, if you do go down this route, I have a strong belief that if you take a paycheck from someone, you have an obligation to do a good job.
yeah,
So, like, I've worked some pretty crazy hours this past, like, year and a half, like 10, 12-hour days for work, and then evenings switch gear, weekends switch gear, and, like, you're building in your spare time.
yeah,
But what it's afforded me is the time and space to do it properly. Like, where I've gone, I don't think we're there yet. We need to iterate again. That's not good enough. All those things. We haven't had, like, an investor or anything, like, on our back, like, telling us we need to move quicker. We've been able to go at a pace that we felt responsible kind of moving at. And it also meant that if I had gone to an investor with an idea like, I'm going to make the world's best hamster home with no product, no experience in industrial design, worst case, like, best case scenario would have been, like, laughed out the room. Worst case scenario is that they would have given me a term sheet and I would have been absolutely ruined
yeah,
from, like, any chance of, like, raising capital in the future or anything like that. I was in no position to negotiate at the beginning. Now, different story. Give me a year when we've got some sales and scale and, like, all those sort of things. Like, again, very different story. And, like, I at the moment am, like, completely self-funded. Um, there is a question of taking out some debt now to get, like, the working capital to get the first stock out. Um, some other, like, I think tough lessons that have been learned in the last week. We've launched, and a lot of the response has been really, really positive. First mistake is we launched UK shipping only, and we've got, on the one hand, like, very heartwarming people are like, oh, if this was available in Canada or if this was available in Norway, I would have bought. I'm going, oh, you can only launch once, and I should have had all these things kind of up and running from the get-go. So that was, like, one big one. And the other thing is, I slightly underestimated how long it would take from this moment when we've got our first product signed off and then the actual product hitting the market.
yeah,
I knew shipping took a while. I knew it would take a little while to get tooling. I was expecting maybe 3 months. What I wasn't expecting is, like, the level of extra QA, so quality assurance, you have to do once you actually get the manufacturing up and running to make sure it's like of the highest quality. So there's an extra round of testing. Even though we've done testing on the prototype, we now need to do the second round of testing on the next piece. So I said ETA at the moment is December. And I got to tell you, trying to get people to buy a product from a brand that's brand new for 350 quid 5 months in advance is not an easy
Yeah.
sell. So like, I think there's been a lot of lessons there. Like, so I'm not deterred at all. I just think we thought we would have a much shorter lead time and some earlier sales kind of like rolling through the door. And at the moment, like, the reality has not been that that's the case. And I think a lot of people are going, oh, well, like, I either have a hamster now and I need a home now, and you're not going to have one for 5 months, or I'll order you when I have a hamster. Why would I spend the money now when I could do it later, and all those kind of things. So, I think it's made us rethink our launch strategy a little bit here. But again, learning a lot of this for the first time.
How? Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate you coming all the way out to Peterborough. Yeah, just everyone know how they can get in contact with you, like
Yeah.
where they can find the website. Also, look at your designs. I mean, I've looked at it, I'm impressed, man. And
Thank you
so,
very much.
yeah,
It's bandaby.com for anyone who wants to look. It's bandaby.com.
yeah.
And yeah, they're available for pre-order. They should be shipping in December.
And you're on LinkedIn if anyone wants to contact you from the industry. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, awesome. Thanks a million, man. Really
Thank you very much,
appreciate you
Lacey.
coming.
Really appreciate you having me on.